Hello everyone, welcome back to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 37 on methods and approaches in disability studies. Disability is a very complex subject and it requires equally complex methods. Then how should one approach, how should one study, or how should one analyze disability and the representation of disability in literature, culture, art, and other domains. In this regard, there are a number of prominent methods and approaches. Some of them are magico-religious model, medical model, social model, and discourse and critical analysis, which is also referred as critical disability studies. So, the study of disability needs various approaches, various models. However, these models are not free from their own limitations. They too have their own limitations and their problems. And each one has its own way of or its own mode of examining disabilities. So when we think about different models and approaches, we also need to think about how disability has originated, what is disability and what is non-disability. In this regard, one has to think disability in the historical and cultural context. How is disability represented historically? And what are the historical analysis of disability representations? In this regard, one has to think about religious institutions. For example, how Christianity and Judaism construct abnormality, monstrosity, and how they represent disability. They find, the religious institutions consider or construct disability as abnormal, as monstrous, as a means of punishment. And the people who are disabled, they claim that they needs to have people's care and concerns. And hence they have developed the idea of charity, curing through miracles, that the people who are disabled, they will be treated and cured through some kind of miracles or through some kind of the grace of God. So these religious practices portray that disability is something which is to be cured and treated. It is abnormal and something unacceptable. People have no space in the society, hence they can survive only on charity. When we consider ancient Western society, particularly Greco-Roman society, we find that they enforce the notions of ableism and the concept of beautiful body. And all those who are disabled or having non-beautiful body, they are called incomplete and are punished for their incomplete body or their wrong body. A lot of examples occur when a child is born and if the child is disabled, they are killed. So the idea of infanticide are also associated with disability because they are incomplete body, they are having incomplete body or they are having wrong body. The idea of wrong body is also having some kind of connotation with what religious institutions call monstrosity or monstrous representation of disability. And then came the idea of science. When we have the evolution of science, particularly in the 18th and 19th century, they developed the notion of the survival of fittest, that those who are fit, those who are able, they can survive in the society, and those who are not able and fit, then they have to, they will be banished, they will be obliterated from the society. So the development of science promoted the idea of normalcy. They promoted the idea of ableistic hegemony and promoted the concept of the cure of disability. So in the historical context, both whether it's a religious or ancient Western model, or we have the evolution of science, they have not given any space for the disabled body. Rather, their entire focus was on the ableistic and normative body. So anyone who is not fitting in the normative concept, normative space, or those who are not having ableistic body, they were seen to be unfit, they were seen to have incomplete and wrong body, and hence they were punished accordingly. When we think about normative world order, then one has to think what Leonard Davis says, that we live in a world of norms that influences every part of the contemporary life. Understanding how and why we think of something as a normal is an important part of understanding the disabled body. So to understand the disabled body, one has to think about what we consider as normal. And if something is normal, it has been seen as important. And in the normal and normative world, the people who have a disabled body or have disability, they find no space. So the idea of normalcy or the idea of normative world order are very part and parcel of our society. And people have to live and survive as per the normative world order. And what is this normative world order? This can be understood by what Dan Goodley says about disability and ability. So the people, the normative world order defines the people with disability as emotional, mad, dependent, intermeshed, creeping, entangled, who have no forms, environment centered, they are non-human, they have animal instinct, they have cosmological relations, and their focus is on the body. And those who are abled are those who have ability. They have been seen in the normative world order as rational, sane, autonomous, optimistic, norming, alone, the same, they are man, they are human, anthropos, their focus is on science and mind. So in this way, we find that there is a kind of binaries between the disabled and the abled. And these binaries have set a normative world order. And this normative world order provides all the negative representations about the people with disabilities. Coming to the models, to begin with a magico-religious model, or the magical and religious models, how they consider or how they view disability. They consider that disability is the consequence of one's actions. It is the consequence of the result of one's karma, and they are suffering because of their karma. Further, karma can be that somebody has done something wrong in the past, which is called sanchit karma or stored actions, and they are facing their problems in the present. So the sanchit karma are the collected actions which are immoral, which are unethical, and somebody has performed in the past, and then they have to suffer in the present. And second is the contemporary karma, which means the actions which is one is part of or the action which one is involved in, and then they will face the problem later on. And another one is instant karma, where one does something wrong and then one will be punished. In this way, magico-religious model says that disability is a curse, is a sin, it is a result of the unethical and immoral actions. It is a failure of moral and ethical actions. It also asserts that the people who are having disability, then they are someone who have no other human task. Rather, their task is to serve God. Their task is to devote their time in the service of God. Hence, the only task which the people with disabled are having is remembering and serving God, and they can survive through charity because they cannot do any kind of work by themselves. The concept of handicapped or handicap is also originating through the concept of charity. Handicapped means that hand in cap, people begging in their cap, which they are holding in their hand. So the idea of handicapped is arising from the notion of charity, the notion of begging. So religious magical model promotes disability as something which is a punishment, which is a curse, and the people who are having disability, they are also seen to be having evil thoughts or evil actions in their mind or in their intentions. When we think about the old classical world literature, whether they are Indian or Western, we find that the people who are disabled, they have some crooked or some hidden and unethical thoughts and designs. Let us think about how Shakespeare represents the people who are having disability. And we find that in the case of Richard III, he is a disabled person having some kind of backbone injuries, and he has been seen one of the most crooked and most unethical, most evil kind of king. Let us think about the people who are disabled in Indian narrative. For example, in Mahabharata, and we find the representation of Shakuni, who is part of all kind of evil and unethical actions. And hence, the only way or the only task which is assigned to the disabled person is serving God, remembering God, so that they can make their other life good, or they can actually have redemption of their sins. So serving God provides them an opportunity to get redeemed of their sins. The other very prominent model is medical model. And medical model focuses on the individual. It looks at the problem in the individual and then asserts the medium or means to cure the problem of the individual. Medical model considers disability as an individual deficit, and it focuses on medical preventions, cure or rehabilitation. Medical model believes that disability is the likeness or loss in the individual, and it can be treated through the intervention of medical practices, can be cured, or the person has to go some kind of rehabilitation. Because in the normative world order, so medical model promotes normative world order, and disability has been seen as lacking something, or it has been seen as something which is incomplete, something wrong, something missing, and the purpose is to make it complete by curing and rehabilitating. Further, Mike Oliver writes that medical model considers disability as a personal tragedy. How it is a personal tragedy? Because the person has been seen, as I said earlier, that they have done something wrong, and this is a result of their actions, consequences of their actions. Hence, medical model considers disability as individual, personal, and it is they are suffering because of their own actions. So this is a personal tragedy. This is a suffering of their actions. And then medical model tries to normalize suffering and body by repairing the physical deficits. So the task of medical model is to bring the people into a normal world order, into the normative world order, by curing, treating, and repairing the physical deficits. They believe that the person who was suffering because of disability, this is a natural response to their bodily wrongs. So there is something wrong with the body, and people with disability have to suffer with some kind of pain. There are three methods or three approaches through which one can consider about correcting bodily wrongs, and these approaches and methods are limb lengthening surgery. Suppose there is like a person who is dwarf, who is of short height, then they can be tall through limb lengthening surgery. Second one is the use of synthetic growth hormones, and third one is cosmetic foot surgery. There are many other means, but what we find over here, that all these three modes or three methods talk about or validate the idea of normative world order, and it says that disability is unacceptable, impairment is unacceptable, and anyone who fits in the normative world order are acceptable, and those who have disability have to follow the normative world order through medical means. So they need some kind of cure and treatment, and then come to the normative world order. Then the issue arises, how far surgery for curing can be used, and how far surgery for curing can be utilized has become a debatable issue in terms of legal and discursive labels. So curing and suffering are debatable, and is it like institutionalized one? Is it legal? Is it discursive? And at places we find that they are all. Further, another question is raised: does surgery empower or give a false consciousness? Suppose a person is having disability and undergoes some kind of medical curing, and does this like medical curing, when the person is brought to a normative world order, then does the person get some kind of empowerment, or people are having a kind of false consciousness where their notion of coming back to the normative world order is just a kind of mirage, just a kind of dream, and it makes no difference. Further, medical model emphasizes a productive desire for normalcy, that the people who are normal, who are able-bodied, they can be or they can have a productive life. And in this way, medical model constructs normalcy, or constructing normalcy is one of the key concerns of medical approach, medical model. It says that once suffering is introduced to medicine, the later, which means medicine has no choice but alteration, which is cosmetic surgery for correction. Correction is seen as normalization, because the elevation of suffering is the ultimate end of the medicine. So how medicine or medical model constructs normalcy? It constructs normalcy through surgery, because it believes it legitimates a discourse that correction is normalization, and cosmetic surgery is something required, or alteration is something required for making one or bringing one back to the normal world. And the task or the goal of medicine is to alleviate suffering, to reduce suffering. And hence, one cannot reject relief from suffering. They are part and parcel of each other. Further, the focus of medical approach is on cure, treatment, rehabilitation, and it supports appropriateness to a person's impairment. So medical model also appropriates, it also considers that disability is a means of disability is something which is incomplete and it reveals some kind of lack or loss. So the purpose of medical model is to compensate this lack or loss. The purpose of medical approach is to compensate the incapacity of disabled people. Medical model, according to Richard K. Scott, has multiple ways of compensating. It compensates the incapacity, the lackness, the loss of disabled people through screening individuals for disability status, through hospitals, government social insurance programs, rehabilitation centers, pensions, private insurance, the legal systems, NGOs fellowships, reservations, concessions, income maintenance, and different other socio-political advantages. So they are these like advantages are seen as a means to compensate what the people who are disabled are lacking. So disabled people are seen incomplete, lacking, and their body is seen in loss. Then there are a number of what we call provisions, a number of methods through which one can compensate one's incapacity. So disability has been associated with incapacity, and then there are certain methods through which they can compensate. However, when we think about Richard K. Scott, he rejects this approach of compensation. He believes and underlines with the idea of difference over deficit. He doesn't consider that disability is deficit. However, he believes in the affirmative actions. So what he implies that the role of hospitals, government insurance programs, NGOs, reservations, concessions, income maintenance, and etc. are not a means of compensation, but a means of affirmative actions. And it is not symbolic of incapacity. In this way, Richard K. Scott tries to differ with a medical approach and says that this should be seen as a affirmative action where people are in need and support through different organizations, different institutions. When we think about disability, and we find that with the rise of scientific medicine in the 19th century, medical model has defined disability as the consequence, as a consequence of one's actions. Richard K. Scott writes that disability is a product of biology in which a congenital or chronic illness, injury, or some other departure from normal biomedical structure or functioning has consequences for an individual's activities of daily living and ultimately for the individual's ability to participate in society. The medical model conceptualizes disability as a long-term or permanent illness or injury and proposes to fix it, or at least ameliorates its effect at the level of individual functioning. It is a model based on deficit, which with the assumption that impairment affects every aspect of life of people with disabilities, invariably in a negative manner. Thus, having a disability is associated with need for medical treatment, financial help, psychological and social support. Here Richard K. Scotch says that disability is a product of biology, and where chronic illness or injury provides some departure from the normal biological or biomedical structure. Further, he says that the purpose of medical model is to fix it, to cure it, to reduce the suffering, or to ameliorate the suffering, because it affects the functioning of individual in their day-to-day life. It is a method which is based upon lack. It is a method based upon deficit, which tries to find out deficiency in the person or lack in the person. And the impairment affects every aspect of life in every manner. So the people who are impaired, their life, their experiences, their work manner, and everything will be affected. Hence, disability is always in need of treatment, in need of financial help, psychological help, and social support. When we think about social model, the term was coined by Mike Oliver. He names it as a social model of disability in 1983. In his essay, The Social Model in Action, Mike Oliver defines social model as, in the broadest sense, the social model of disability is about nothing more complicated than a clear focus on the economic, environmental, and cultural barriers encountered by people who are viewed by others as having some form of impairment. So, social model believes that disability is a case of social, environmental, economic, and cultural barriers, and it is viewed by others as having some form of impairment, whether physical, mental, or intellectual. The barriers disabled people encounter include accessible educational system, working environments, inadequate disability benefits, discriminatory health and social support services, inaccessible transport, houses and public buildings and amenities, and the evaluation of disabled people through negative images in media, films, television, and newspapers. It implies that the people who are disabled, they are discriminated and not having enough support in terms of accessing the transport, accessing houses, public buildings. They lack any kind of support there. It also implies that these kind of images of disabled people are formulated and circulated, as well as validated through media, different types of media, whether film, television, or newspapers. The social model was developed by Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation, which in short known as UPIAS, and UPIAS aimed to replace segregation with opportunities for the disabled people and to make them fully participate in the society. UPIAS defines disabled people as oppressed, outlined their barriers. So the Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation says that the people who are disabled, they are oppressed and they are controlled by different barriers. They define that we find ourselves isolated and excluded by such things as a flight of steps, that they don't find the stairs or flights to actually in their favor. They don't have ramps there. Moreover, they also consider that they have inadequate support in public and personal transport. There is unsuitable housings because the housings are built as per the abled people. They are built vertically where people have to climb. And in terms of work routines, whether in factories or offices, all these places, they lack sufficient and up-to-date aids and equipments. In this way, EPIAS tries to reveal that the people with disability are oppressed, and then they face a lot of barriers, whether it can be in terms of like climbing in the steps of airports, flights. It can be the public transports. It can be the housing systems, or it can be in terms of the workplaces where the people are suppressed, they are oppressed, and they are segregated. EPIAS plays a greater role in shaping and formulating the notion of social model of disability. It asserts that it is society which disables physically impaired people. So the people who are impaired, they are disabled by the society. They are not impaired because of their differences in the body. Disability is something imposed on top of our impairment by the way we are unnecessarily isolated and excluded from full participation in the society. So the people like who are having impairment, they are discriminated, they are isolated, they are treated differently, and hence disability is imposed upon the people over their impairment. And they are isolated, excluded from the participation in society. Disabled people are therefore an oppressed group in society. So it brings that disability is a social concern, not a medical concern. Disability is a structural problem. It is a larger social and a cultural problem where people are excluded in terms of multiple modes, multiple norms. And the social model challenges the concept of divine punishment, karma, or moral failing, or biological deficit. It challenges the idea of divine punishment, that people who are disabled, they are punished because of their karma or because of their unethical and evil actions. They do not consider disability as a moral failing or biological deficit. Rather, their focus is on social oppression, cultural discourse, and environmental barriers, that how society excludes and treats the disabled people, and how discourses are built around disabled people, and what are the barriers which disabled people face. Mike Oliver says that social model stresses the externally imposed restrictions. The focus of social model approach is to find out and remove the restrictions and barriers which are imposed from outside, which are externally imposed. Tom Shakespeare says that social model mandates barrier removal, anti-discrimination legislation, independent living, and other response to social oppression. So Tom Shakespeare asserts that the purpose of social model approach is to remove the barriers which lie in the progress of disabled people, to formulate the laws to prohibit discriminations, to make the survival and living of the people who are disabled easy. Shelley Tremayne asserts that disabled is not necessarily a consequence of impairment. that she asserts that disability and impairment are not synonymous and they don't go hand in hand. In other words, that disability is not the result of impairment, that somebody has impairment and hence they are disabled in the society. Second reason is that impairment is not the sufficient condition for disability. That one can actually disable a person because he or she is having impairment. So impairment is not the logic for disability. Impairment is not the cause for disability. Rather, impairment is a necessary condition for disability. So disablement is not a necessary condition for impairment. Rather, impairment is a condition for disability. So those who are like having disability, it means they have some impairment. But impairment is not sufficient condition for disability. Further, the difference between disability, which is social exclusion, and impairment is physical limitations. So one has to differentiate between disability and impairment. Disability is socially constructed, and impairment is some kind of physical limitations. A social model proposes that the disabled people are oppressed group and on whom the disadvantage restrictions have been imposed, and it has been imposed by the society in a particular way which limits their day-to-day activities. It limits their participation in the social and public activities. So impairment is individual and private, and disability is structural and public. So impairment can happen to an individual, it will be limited to the individual. But disability is constructed structurally, socially, and publicly, and it has a larger consequences for prohibiting and limiting one's social and public activities. The purpose, the aim of social model is to transform society, to bring change in the society. Social model is instrumental in the liberation of disabled people. According to Mike Oliver, the social model is a practical tool, not a theory. It is not an idea or a concept. It is basically a practical tool through which one can build an equitable and equal society. Social model rejects impairment and the lived experiences of impairment. This is one of the drawbacks, because one cannot completely reject impairment. Impairments do bring their own experiences of their own experiences. The impairment does limit certain actions. However, social model rejects this idea of impairment. This is one of the drawbacks for social model. And there is another approach which is called critical disability studies, and it rejects any kind of model, whether religious, medical, or social, and it says that disability studies should be dealt in terms of critical analysis, in terms of discourse analysis. The way the people who are marginalized based upon gender, race, sexuality, age. Similarly, disabled people are also marginalized. So the tools of gender, race, sexuality, age, and social class can be used in understanding and studying disability. So a critical disability model says that one can make disability studies interdisciplinary and borrow tools from different sources, from all the sources which deals with the marginalization, which deals with social oppression, or which deals with the limitations of people. Further, the focus of critical disability studies is on disabilism, which means to study the social imposition of restrictions and the effect of impairment. The effect of impairment is how a person who is having impairment, their functioning in the social world gets limited. Critical disability studies promotes equality and it promotes anti-discriminatory law on the grounds of race, gender, and sexuality. So the way the people who are fighting for the anti-discriminatory law in terms of race, gender, and sexuality, so people with disability can also borrow their tools and fight for their equality, and it can promote equitable and equal society. The aim of critical disability studies is to provide empowerment to the disabled people, to include them in the mainstream society, and focus on the individual rights of the disabled people. So the task of critical disability studies is to analyze critically, to apply a number of discourses without any kind of discrimination. So wherever they think that medical model can be suitable, they can borrow certain tools and ideas from medical model, they can borrow tools and ideas from social model, then they can also borrow tools and ideas from the critical theory and then apply it. So critical disability study is a very broad area which is basically focusing on the notion of discourse analysis. One can apply critical disability studies in terms of cultural studies of disability people, in terms of social conditions of disabled people, in terms of health conditions of disabled people, in terms of cultural practices of disabled people. It can also be applied how disabled people experience or how disabled people have their positions and roles in the society. So it can be applied at the level of education, at the level of their access to the medical care, and so many other things. To conclude, disability is not just a medical or moral condition. It's a deeply shaped by social, cultural, and political forces. So disability is constructed through different forces. It can be social, cultural, and political. Disability is not just a physical limitation, individual limitation. It is not like a moral condition that one is facing the consequences of one's actions. When we think about different models, for example, multi-religious, medical, or social models, they do offer distinct and overlapping explanations, but they are not complete. One has to also think about critical analysis where they can borrow certain terms, certain tools, certain concepts from each other, and then make disability studies person-centered. The critical disability studies approach challenges us to think beyond binaries and embrace diversity. Hence, when we look at the methods and approaches of disability study, no model is complete, no approach is complete. People have to use different models, different approaches at their discrete, and then think about how they can be beneficial and useful. With this, I stop this lecture. Thank you.